Vandeham Sri Guru Sri Juta Padakamalam Sri Gurun.
Vancha kalpatarubhyashta kripasindubhyevacha patitanam papanebo bhaishnavebo namo namaha. Welcome back to the online Bhakti Sastri Sri Upadesamrta course. Today we're going to be covering texts 2 and 3 of the Upadesamrta, translations and purports by ISKCON's founder Acharya, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshush Unmilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namane. Namaste Saraswati Devi Gaudavani Pracharyane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatadesha Tarane. Let's begin with a review of Lesson 1. In Lesson 1, we were discussing who is Srila Rupa Goswami and his significance, his significant role and service and contribution to the mission of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. We were discussing the purpose of the Sri Upadesamrita, particularly relevant for the beginners in Krishna consciousness. We were discussing, as Prabhupada comments, advancement in Krishna consciousness depends upon one's attitude, and how one's attitude is reflected in one's behavior, and basic guidelines for behavior are presented in the Sri Upadesamrita. And we were discussing the appropriate way of controlling the urges, Etan Vegan, the 6 urges of the voice, of the mind, of the genitals, of the tongue, of the belly, of anger, and how these can be controlled by practicing Krishna consciousness. And also how the first verse, Etan Veganyo Vishaheta Dira, Sarvam Apimam Pritivim Shashishya, the first verse also gives us criteria upon how we can recognize the bona fide guru. Let us chant texts 2 and 3 of the Sri Upadesamrita. Atyahara prayashascha prajalpani amagraha janasangascha lolyam cha shadivir bhakti vanashiti. Rupa Goswami is explaining that ati aha, overeating or over-collecting, prayash, over-endeavor for mundane things, prajalpa, mundane talks, niyamagraha, the twofold meaning of niyamagraha is over-attachment to rules and regulations, not understanding the principles behind them, or neglect of the rules and regulations, janasanga, association of materialistic people or common people, lolyam, greed, sadhabi, these 6, bhakti vanashati, destroy one's development of devotion. Let's discuss the different items of the 6 symptoms of destroy one's devotional service. Prabhupada gives the example of atyaha, that the tendency in human civilization, in human society, is to collect more than is required. He gives the example that if a grain of rice is in the street, then the birds will come and simply accept whatever rice they require to fulfill their immediate requirement, and they'll go away. However, the humans will collect whatever is available and store it, and perhaps do business later. And this is the tendency of human society, to collect more than what is required, and with an exploitative mentality. Prabhupada's also explaining that the propensity for atyahara is very detrimental to spiritual life, because one becomes so preoccupied with collecting and acquiring and accumulating so many things which actually become a burden. Prabhupada explains in the purport that actually, ideally, a simple lifestyle is recommended for spiritual life, simple living and high thinking. An agrarian-based lifestyle where we can produce our own requirements, produce our own food, build our own homes with the elements that are easily available, make our own clothes. A self-sufficient lifestyle is actually ideal for spiritual development, because in such a situation one can fully follow and maintain the values of Krishna consciousness. However, we find in the lifestyle where we're dependent upon the industrialized commodities, that so often we have to some extent, compromise our core values of Krishna consciousness as a result of working with and accepting the employment of the materialistic people. Sometimes you may have to go to parties that your boss is arranging, his child's birthday party, and show affection to the boss and his family members. You have to laugh when he cracks his jokes. In this way, so often we have to compromise many of the values of Krishna consciousness in order to, because we're dependent upon the facilities that the materialists are providing. And in this way, we cannot actually maintain completely the principle of janasanga, of giving up the association of the worldly-minded people, as Rupa Goswami is recommending. So for that reason, a lifestyle where we're actually independent of the industrialized commodities is ideal for Krishna consciousness, and therefore Srila Prabhupada regularly stressed self-sufficiency, simple living. In fact, very early in the mission, before most of our temple properties were acquired and developed, Prabhupada purchased land in New Brindavan in West Virginia, a huge amount of land. And from the very early stages of our movement, he encouraged devotees to live in the rural environment, completely dependent upon nature, protect the cows, milk the cows, and grow food, and in that way be completely self-sufficient and practice Krishna consciousness and go back home to Godhead. Prabhupada comments regarding Atyaha. Unfortunately, people accept religion for material prosperity because of Atyaha, or an excessive desire for such prosperity. We see also generally in the modern world that those people who are interested in religious life, generally it's a tendency, the tendency is because of the prosperity and the facilities that they can acquire as a result of their worship of God. Actually, this is described as Mishra Bhakti, devotion, but there is an intention. We want so many things from God, and therefore our purity of loving God is mixed with our selfish interest. Prabhupada's explaining this is due to atyahara, the tendency of over-collecting and overeating. True religion, however, instructs people to be satisfied with bare necessities of life while cultivating Krishna consciousness. Even though we require economic development, true religion allows it only for supplying the bare necessities of material existence. Jivasha tattva jigyasha. The real purpose of life is to inquire about the absolute truth. Prabhupada's quoting here from Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto, second chapter, that kamasha nendriya priti labho jivata yavata. Yes, sense enjoyment is allocated for the living entity, but how much sense enjoyment should we have? Sutta Goswami is explaining that labho jivata yavata, simply the minimum that is required to keep the body and soul together. Just like we are hungry, so we require to eat. In that eating process, naturally there'll be some sensual pleasure. So that minimum requirement to keep ourselves healthy for jivasha tattva jigyasha, keep ourselves alive, for tattva jigyasha, for practicing Krishna consciousness, and tattva jigyasha, inquiring as to the absolute truth. So whatever is required to keep ourselves healthy and alive, that we're entitled to have, and naturally there'll be some sense enjoyment. But living life simply for enjoying the senses would put one in the category of atyahara, and sadbi bhakti vinashati. This can become an impediment in one's development in Krishna consciousness. One becomes preoccupied trying to acquire so many things. These things are only acquired after so much endeavor in the material world, and having acquired these things, we become obligated to maintain them. When Hiranyakashipu took his darling son, Prahlad Maharaj, on his lap and asked him, "My dear Prahlad, what's the most interesting thing you've learnt in school?" Prahlad replied that Sada Samudvigna, dhyam asat grahat. As soon as a living entity, asat grahat, becomes attached to, becomes dependent upon, grahat, any asat, any temporary thing, then sada sam udvigna, dhyam, one's mind, dhyam, becomes sam udvigna, full of anxiety, full of tension. We're always concerned about losing these temporary things, and we're always preoccupied with trying to protect these temporary things. I remember in the old days we used to travel regularly in India on the train. Now of course we go on Indigo or Jet, but in the old days we would go on the train, and as you're starting your journey, perhaps Kolkata, Delhi, many vendors would be on the platform just before the train starts, and they're dangling chains and locks. Actually very good business, because everyone is in anxiety, my luggage will be stolen. And we would sleep. It would be very difficult to sleep on the train, but if you would get a little sleep, immediately upon waking up, my experience was the first thing I would think about was, oh, my luggage, my luggage. And this way, actually, we're always in anxiety because we become dependent upon these temporary things. And in this way, the consciousness can be diverted and become preoccupied with collecting and maintaining all these unnecessary temporary things. And our energy and attention for Krishna consciousness can become misdirected, can become diverted. And similarly, prayas. Just here we are in Prabhupada's Hare Krishna land, ISKCON Juhu. But all around us we hear the busy traffic of Mumbai. From early hours in the morning, people are getting up and working so hard, endeavoring so hard. Oftentimes we hear of our members and they're working 16 hours, 18 hours a day just to maintain their livelihood, just to keep ahead of the competition. And in this way, such effort is required just for keeping oneself alive. Having to leave for your place of work very early in the morning, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, and then working until late at night, 8 p.m. for sometimes 5-6 days a week. In that situation, one is exhausted. Such an endeavor just for maintaining one's livelihood. It becomes very difficult to cultivate Krishna consciousness when we're so much exhausted, or we're so much entangled. Maya jale baddha hoye, Thakur Bhaktivinoda singing. Maya jale, in the network of illusion, Maya jal, the illusory network, baddha hoye, we have bound ourselves up. Achal miche kajaloye, and thus we have to perform so many obligatory tasks. And it takes so much energy. And by the time a person gets to later in life, they're so exhausted, that they've been so entangled in the material engagements, haven't actually been able to give quality time for cultivating Krishna consciousness, hearing and chanting in the association of the devotees. And they miss the opportunity. And then late in life, they're so habituated to that busy materialistic life, they can never settle down into a nice regulated sadhana program. So this over-endeavor can be a great obstacle for development in spiritual life. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is explaining that Jukta hara vahadascha, Jukta cheshtashta karmashu, Jukta satnavabodascha, Jogo bhavadi dukhaha. That a yogi is very regulated in all aspects of his life. Jukta aha, regulated eating, as we've been discussing, he eats Krishna prasad in a regulated manner. Jukta hara vihadascha, recreation. Jukta cheshtashcha karma. Also one's cheshta karma, one's work to maintain one's body, that should also be regulated. Prabhupada says out of 24 hours, we should try to not utilize more than 6 hours for maintaining the body and extended family. Not more than 6 hours a day. If you can arrange your lifestyle in that way, then you'll have ample time for quality cultivation of Krishna consciousness. That's prayas. Prajalpa, the mundane talks. The materialists are so busy and all the time chit-chatting, mundane talk, gramar kota, the current news, what's going on. And it's even become more enhanced now with the modern social media, that anything any of your friends are doing, they'll immediately send you a message. Oh, I'm getting on the bus, with a photo. I'm getting off the bus, I've arrived. In this way, we're completely inundated with this mundane news, which is of no ultimate value for the development of our Krishna consciousness. And and we can get caught up in all of this unnecessary mundane talk. Prabhupada also explains sports and recreation, playing cards. We heard story that when Prabhupada was in Australia and devotees were driving past a golf course. And Prabhupada asked the devotees, what are they doing? And golf is not such a popular sport in India, but becoming so, we've heard. And Prabhupada, he saw them there with the sticks, and what are they doing? And the devotees explained, Prabhupada, they have the stick and the little ball, and the objective is to get the little ball into the little hole, into the hole. And this is the pastime of sophisticated, aristocratic, intelligent, educated people. But this is such a waste of time. The prajalpa, the mundane talks. And in this way we become addicted, we become dependent upon this for our entertainment, for enjoyment, watching sports and these types of recreational activities. And in that way, prajalpa, we simply miss the real opportunity, the wonderful opportunity that we have of using our human life for cultivating Krishna consciousness. Niyamagraha. Prabhupada explains the twofold meaning of niyamagraha. The first meaning is that one is overly attached to rules and regulations, not understanding the essential principles behind them. The niyam agraha, too much attachment, too much concentration, too much absorption simply in the rules and regulations. Examples we can see of this. One time we were on a parikrama, one example comes to mind, we were on a parikrama in Mayapur. His Holiness Kadambakanand Swami was leading an ecstatic kirtan in the temple of Vrindavan Das Thakur in Mamgachi. Not a very frequently popularized temple. It's in a remote village area. Not so many people visit there. We had about 140 devotees. During the time of the arti, a huge kirtan. Devotees moving up and down, Maharaj is dancing, huge kirtan. The arti ended, and for some reason the temple pujari was very adamant that we stop the kirtan. And he interrupted, in the middle of the kirtan, interrupted everybody, stopped the kirtan, and then the regularly chanted Prem Dhani prayers, which are regularly done at the end of the arti, following the standard regulation. So yes, that's okay, following the standard regulation, but under these circumstances, to allow the kirtan to continue, we feel would have been more pleasing to Lord Hari. So many devotees there performing Sankirtan. So in this way we have to understand the meaning, the principle behind the rules and regulations, and not simply become focused on the external rules, not understanding the purpose behind them. Another example, generally in the arti, when the pujari is offering flowers and chamur, he's ringing the bell. Now in our temples, when the arti, Dhub arti is performed at the time of the Srimad Bhagavatam class, then pujari won't ring the bell, because the glorification of Lord Hari is going on, and the bell will become a disturbance. In this way that rule is overlooked because a higher principle. These are just some simple examples. But we can see in his preaching, Srila Prabhupada was very expert in adjusting the rules and regulations, understanding the principles behind them, and we'll discuss that a little in relation to some of the significant adjustments that Srila Prabhupada made in the Krishna consciousness movement, which facilitated the spreading of Krishna consciousness all over the world. Prior to Srila Prabhupada's time, generally in the ashrams were exclusively, residence in the ashram was exclusively available for devotees in male bodies. However, when Prabhupada came to the West, he could see that the standard in Western culture and Western society is that men and women are given equal opportunity. In fact, in the country I'm from, and I'm assuming many other Western countries, there is legislation which prevents people from discriminating on the basis of gender in terms of work opportunity. And you're not allowed to actually advertise for a position of employment and mention the gender, man wanted or woman wanted. This is illegal in many Western countries. This is the standard, the equal opportunity. So in this environment, Prabhupada understood that what opportunities are offered to the devotees in the male bodies should similarly be offered to devotees in the female bodies. In this way he created the Brahmacharini ashram. In fact, he even created the word Brahmacharini. Prabhupada created the word Brahmacharini. And as Acharya, he's making adjustments in order to effectively spread Krishna consciousness all over the world. And we can see how tremendous the Krishna consciousness has spread in the Western countries through congregational development, where men, women, families are all coming together and practicing Krishna consciousness. And Krishna consciousness is spreading so effectively as a result of Srila Prabhupada understanding the actual higher principle. Priti Bidyache Jota Nagaradi Gram, Mahaprabhu explained, in every town and village. Priti Bide, all over this world, not just in India, all over this world. Priti Bidyache Jota Nagaradi Gram, Prochar Hoibe More Nam. There will be my holy name will be spread. Prochar Hoibe More Nam. So in order to do that, Prabhupada made adjustments which were against the rules of the etiquette and tradition from many of his peers and the environment he was coming from. However, that was required in order to fulfill Mahaprabhu's mission. And we can see that Prabhupada was very expert in doing that. In this connection, Srila Prabhupada writes in the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, 9th chapter, where Bhishmadev is receiving the Pandavas and Lord Krishna, that expert religionists know perfectly well how to adjust religious principles in terms of times and place. All the great acharyas or religious preachers or reformers of the world executed their mission by adjustment of religious principles in terms of time and place. There are different climates and situations in different parts of the world, and if one has to discharge his duties to preach the message of the Lord, he must be expert in adjusting things in terms of time and place. So we've been discussing niyama-agraha, or over-attachment to rules and regulations, not understanding the principles behind them. And the other aspect of niyama-agraha is niyam-agraha, is agraha, not accepting, neglecting rules and regulations, the basic principles of Krishna consciousness, which is obviously detrimental to one's healthy advancement. And that should also be avoided. Sad vidha bhakti vinashati, as these things will destroy one's devotion. Jana sangha, associating with materialistic people. Krishna explains in Bhagavad Gita that sangat sanjayate kama. Sangat sanjayate. Sanjayate means developing or producing. Sangat, association. As a result of the association one keeps, one will develop desires. Sangat sanjayate kama. One's desire, one's aspiration, one's hopes are influenced, are developed by the type of association that one keeps. And if one associates extensively with materialistic people, then one will be affected, one may be polluted by their values, by their aspirations, and one's healthy progress in Krishna consciousness can be compromised. And lobha, greed. Obviously greed will degrade one's consciousness. One becomes overly absorbed in acquiring material things and becomes diverted from the real purpose of life, of developing Krishna consciousness. Sadbir bhakti vinashati. Sadbir, over preoccupation with sadbir, these 6 activities, bhakti vinashati, can destroy one's progressive development of Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada concludes his discussion on the 2nd verse of the Upadesamrta. The Krishna consciousness movement offers a spiritual community that can bring about a peaceful condition in the world. Every intelligent man should purify his consciousness and rid himself of the above-mentioned 6 hindrances to devotional service by taking wholehearted shelter of this Krishna consciousness movement. Srila Prabhupada Ki. Let us chant the Sanskrit mantra of text number 3. Utsahat nishchayat dharyat tat tat karma pravatanat sangatyagat sato brite sadvir bhakti prasiddhiti. Now these 6 activities, Rupa Goswami is explaining, sadvir, these 6 activities, bhakti prasiddhiti, enhance one's progress in Krishna consciousness. Regarding utsaha, enthusiasm, naturally an enthusiastic devotee is very much appreciated by Krishna and by the devotees. I can reflect on an experience I had before I joined the Krishna consciousness movement. I was a student in the college in Melbourne, and I was doing part-time job in the evening, working in a restaurant, and in the evenings I would do the work which had been prescribed to me by the employer, and having completed the work I would sit there. And One evening I came to the restaurant for work, and the employer said to me, "We don't need you anymore. You've been terminated." And I understood why, because there was two of us who were the assistants in the restaurant, and the other employee was very enthusiastic and doing much more than what was the prescribed duty. And in that way, it was very much appreciated by the employer, and that person was carried on, but I lost the job. So when I joined the Krishna consciousness movement, I thought, I'm not going to make that mistake again. And I was very enthusiastic to do as much service as I could. In fact, we had in Melbourne, Mahaprabhu Mandir, I remember we had a roster which was covering all of the different services that the temple devotees, new devotees were required to do. And each day, so many different slots. Usually there were different devotees covering those services. And I think I had my name there in about 90% of those different activities. And I kept myself very busy in Krishna consciousness, completely absorbed in an enthusiastic way, and that gave me a strong foundational experience of Krishna consciousness. So the more enthusiastic we are, naturally that will have a direct impact on our progress in Krishna consciousness. Regarding Nishchayat, Prabhupada explains, devotional service is so pure and perfect that once having begun, one is forcibly dragged to the ultimate success. There are certainly many good qualities among fruitive actives, philosophical speculators, and mystic yogis, but all good qualities automatically develop in the character of a devotee. No extraneous endeavor is needed. Nishchayat, one has to be confident. One has to have confidence in the practice of Krishna consciousness and carry on, remain with determination to practice Krishna consciousness in spite of ups and downs that we experience. This confidence is required, this faith and confidence in the process of Krishna consciousness. And with this confidence and faith, our progress and success in Krishna consciousness is guaranteed. Regarding Dharyat, Srila Prabhupada explains that the Krishna consciousness movement was started single-handedly, and in the beginning there was no response. Prabhupada began his preaching in India, but with little result. Hardly he was able to produce committed followers of Krishna consciousness. He was unable to get any permanent facility for carrying on his preaching activities. However, Prabhupada didn't lose his hope, and he remained determined. And subsequently he was able to go to the West. And upon arriving in the West, also in New York in the first year, 1966, also Prabhupada didn't appear to have any immediate success. We hear that Prabhupada would on occasion return to the India steamship office and look and see about return trips to India, because initially he wasn't actually meeting with success in his preaching effort. It took some time. Prabhupada gives the example of a young girl. When she's newly married, she may desire a child, as most ladies do. However, upon marriage, she cannot immediately have a child. It's not biologically possible. One has to wait. And in due course of time, newly married brides are blessed with a child, but it takes time. And similarly, Prabhupada's giving this example. Similarly, after some period of time, the preaching began to take hold, and all success came. And as Prabhupada's commenting that we started single-handedly, one person, and in a short period of time, Hare Krishna movement spread all over North America and all over Europe, all over the world, because of Prabhupada's confidence and determination in the order of his spiritual master. In the beginning there was no response, Prabhupada's explaining, but because we continued to execute our devotional activities with patience, with great dedication and faith in the order of Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, which Prabhupada received to preach in Western countries in English language, gradually people began to understand the importance of the movement, and now they are eagerly participating. Prabhupada's writing this at a time when the Krishna consciousness movement had spread so rapidly. There was thousands of devotees taking to Krishna consciousness. They are eagerly participating. One should not be impatient in the discharge of devotional service, but should take instructions from the spiritual master and execute them with patience, depending on the mercy of Guru and Krishna. Sato Brute, Prabhupada translates as following in the Sato Brite, following the footsteps of the previous acharyas. The Sat sadhus and Brite following them. And naturally we're inspired by the example of Srila Prabhupada and our great acharyas in our line and their dedication to Krishna consciousness and their contribution to spreading Krishna consciousness all over the world. We should follow their example. Also, in lecturing in Los Angeles in 1970, Srila Prabhupada comments in regard to Sato-Brite. And Sato-Brite dealing very straightforward, no diplomacy, no politics, no duplicity. That will not help. So Sato-Brite, his profession should be very straightforward, no underhand dealing. So as much as possible, a devotee should extricate himself from activities which are not very honest. A grihastha should make an honest livelihood in whatever field, professional field or in business, and should avoid illegal activities or also activities which are connected to sinful life. And in that way, one should maintain himself, his livelihood should be as honest as possible. And that will be very conducive for one's advancement in Krishna consciousness. Sadvida Bhakti Prasiddhati. So by following these 6 activities, one's devotional service can develop very wonderfully. Prabhupada concludes in his purport to text 3 that if one strictly follows the advice given in this verse by Srila Rupa Goswami, namely being enthusiastic, being confident, being patient, giving up the association of unwanted persons, following the regulated principles, and remaining in the association of devotees, one is sure to advance in Krishna consciousness. Srila Prabhupada ki